Take a moment and think back to your 40s, your 50s, maybe even your early 60s. How much of that time was spent worrying about what people thought of you, wondering if you were doing life the right way, trying not to disappoint anyone, following rules you never consciously chose but somehow felt obligated to obey? If that sounds familiar, you're far from alone. Over the years, I've listened to many women in their 70s and 80s talk about their lives, the little worries and quiet pressures they carried around for decades. And I kept hearing the same sentence in different words. I wish I had let that go much sooner. They simply realized they spent far too much energy carrying things that never really deserved so much of their attention. Today, we're talking about those things, the expectations, the fears, the habits that quietly stole their peace. And maybe, as you listen, you'll recognize one or two that you're still carrying today. Number 1, other people's timelines. Most of us grow up with a script. Get married by this age, have children by that age, build your career, retire at 65, slow down, as if life is some kind of race with checkpoints. But the women who seem happiest in their 70s and 80s often have one thing in common. At some point, they stopped following someone else's timeline. Some started businesses in their late 50s, some went back to school in their 60s, some fell in love in their 70s, some packed their bags and moved somewhere completely new when most people expected them to stay put. Life didn't end because they were late. In many ways, it finally began. On the other hand, many women say they spent years feeling behind, measuring themselves against expectations that never really belonged to them in the first place. The truth is, life doesn't hand out awards for arriving on schedule. It simply keeps moving, and every day asks the same question: what would you like to do with the time you have now? Maybe there's something you've quietly told yourself you're too old to do. Travel? Learn an instrument? Start painting? Who decided you missed your chance? It's worth asking. 2. The guilt of saying no. Many women were raised to believe that being a good person meant being available all the time, helpful, reliable, easygoing, never difficult. So they became the person everyone called, the person who said yes. And for a while, that probably felt meaningful. But years later, many looked back and realized something painful. They had become experts at caring for everyone else and complete beginners at caring for themselves. One woman in her 70s said something I'll never forget. I spent years feeling guilty for wanting one quiet afternoon to myself. Just one afternoon, just some space to breathe. The women who seem most peaceful later in life finally understood something important. Saying no doesn't make you cold. It doesn't make you selfish. It simply means you're a human being with limits, and the people who truly love you usually understand those limits much better than you fear they will. 3. The size and shape of their bodies. This one touches something deep. Many women spent years being hard on themselves, avoiding pictures, skipping the beach, covering up, waiting until they lost weight. And when they look back now, many don't remember the number on the scale. They remember the moments they missed, the photos they avoided, the laughter they held back, the memories they never made because they thought they needed a different body first. And that realization can be heartbreaking. Maybe your body isn't exactly what it once was. Few of ours are, but maybe it still walks you through your neighborhood. Maybe it hugs your grandchildren. Maybe it dances in the kitchen when your favorite song comes on. That's worth noticing, and perhaps even appreciating. Number 4. Relationships that were already over. Another theme comes up again and again: staying too long. Friendships that became one-sided. Marriages that had quietly ended years before anyone said it out loud. Family relationships that constantly left them hurt, exhausted, or anxious. Many women in their 70s speak about this with surprising clarity. They say letting go was difficult. Sometimes it was painful. Sometimes people didn't understand. But many also describe it as one of the most freeing decisions they ever made. Others stayed because of obligation, because of guilt, because they hoped things would change. And many of them grieve the years they spent waiting. The truth is, letting go isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's very quiet. You stop chasing. You stop over-explaining. You stop pouring all your energy into relationships that no longer have room for you. Sometimes that's not giving up. Sometimes that's self-respect. Number 5, the opinions of people who didn't matter. Not the people who loved them, the others. The neighbor with an opinion about everything. The coworker who questioned every decision. The distant relative who disapproved of their divorce, their haircut, their career change, or the way they chose to live. Women over 70 often laugh about this now because they can hardly believe how much mental space they gave to people who eventually played such a tiny role in their lives. One woman said, "I worried for years about what someone thought of me. Then she moved away and I never saw her again." Years of worry, gone, and life kept moving. Our attention is precious. We only get so much of it. Spending it on people who don't genuinely care about us can be one of the most exhausting habits of all. Number 6, perfectionism disguised as standards. There's nothing wrong with wanting things to go well, but perfectionism is something different. Perfectionism says, not yet. Wait, you're not ready. Many women remember opportunities they delayed because everything wasn't perfect. The dinner party they never hosted, the trip they kept postponing, the timing never felt right, the conditions never seemed perfect. Years passed, and eventually they realized something simple. Life is messy. There is almost never a perfect time, and that's okay. A life fully lived with all its imperfections is usually far richer than a life spent waiting for ideal conditions. Here's something many women over 70 have learned. Wisdom isn't reserved for old age. You don't have to wait decades to discover these things. Maybe the better question isn't, what do I wish I had ignored earlier? Maybe it's this, what am I still carrying that I don't need anymore? The comparisons, the guilt, the pressure, the opinions, the expectations, the relationships that ended in your heart long ago. You are allowed to set them down. You can begin living more on your own terms today. And sometimes the smallest act of freedom is simply deciding that something which has weighed on you for years doesn't get to take up space in your mind anymore. Subscribe for more honest conversations about life, growth, and what it actually means to thrive at every age. See you in the next video.